Thank you very much. I wanted to record this. Actually, today I'm going down to see my friends, who's a reverend serving Orange County Buddhist Church. Um, that's July 14th. This is an interview, I suppose, where we kind of share the perspective of Zen. But on top of that, I think there was another occasion where it reminded me of something that I thought might actually help understand this certain Zen culture that we have, without falling into this sort of misunderstanding, which happens really easily. Um, so I try to be careful because, one perspective can already be a little bit misleading. And with that recognition still, I think I'll share it. So just as one reference point, I'll share this. The seemingly strict this atmosphere in the monastery, or this practice teacher-student thing, happens quite commonly, and many sort of criticize it as like overly institutionalized, not sensitive enough to our feelings and thoughts, interest. And I tell you, I grew up as the youngest of the siblings. That's actually in the family, so I always had that thought that, what about me? This mentality is always here. So, what about me? What's in it for me? Sort of a selfishness is there here, usually me. And that, of course, came as a little bit of a slap in my face, because, that's not how we go train. But more or less, we carry this sort of a sentiment, idealism, and then without we realize it, it'd be centered not around the Buddha Dharma, but around our agendas, around me. Meism creeps in constantly. And not talking about any specific, practitioners or teachers, because it's always us. I can always tell you this for sure, because I grew up with this sort of a selfish mentality. So yes, this meism comes out quite easily. When they say, keep your mouth shut and sit, when they say, it's the one of the favorite expressions I shared when I was sad, when I was told that, oh, you don't matter. When I went out there, say, oh, I'm gonna make a difference, and people come back and say, oh, you don't matter. And it appears as a really harsh comment that negates the whole thing. Then you start to think, oh, what is that compassion thing? What is that kindness thing? And there was easily this kind of misunderstanding that happens. What I'd like to say is that when you're driving the car, we tend to misunderstand who's driving the car, who's driving this life. And we say, these beautiful feelings drive this car. This wonderful intellectual understanding, this knowledge, wisdom, sort of controls this car. And that's, I daringly say, is okay in lay practice. What's in it for me? How that's work for the society? How is it good for my mental health? What do I achieve? What can I demonstrate? Those are thoughts, things that come from the book, things that comes from whatever materials you get. But then, the way I understand this practice is that when we say don't matter, we're saying, I kind of disagree, because who's driving this car, this life? is our feelings, thoughts, which is misunderstanding. We tend to say, yes, because I feel right, because I think this is, I got to attain some knowledge. Well, let them drive this life. Then trouble comes. What I don't know, I say to my students and all of you, I guess the people who come into this step forward, this path, is show me a driver. Show who's driving your life. And who's the host here. And I do feel, again, our tradition in Japan has there's a half lay and then there's a monastic. And that's wonderful, beautiful, and hideous all at the same time. Because what that means is sometimes we skip Christmas with the family. Sometimes we don't get to spend time the way ordinary people do. That goes on through our lifetime. And that's sometimes what you're stepping into. There's a way to balance things out. I mean, all in all, that by itself poses a certain challenge, creativity, that tests your creativity without falling into this, oh, this isn't fair kind of thought. In the swordsmanship, I thought, Zen and swordsmanship are very go together often in history. The question always arises, who is it who's holding this sword? If it's the knowledge, if it's these feelings, five senses, if it's this consciousness who's holding the sword, then it either goes behind or goes aside the reality. That subtle gap determines the person's life and death. Somebody says, because I think there was a baseball game in Dodger Stadium. The way you swing your bat, if it's your thought, it's your knowledge who's holding the bat. That subtle gap changes the result, the course of life, game and life, yes. And that's kind of how we approach, that's the basis. So the seemingly strict, indifferent attitude to your emotions, to your thoughts, I personally think it's their passengers that deserves good hospitality, good attention, and good care, which I think is a beautiful thing. And in that sense, it has its significant value. And people who practice it that way have virtue that way. And yet, when we enter this path full of this, let this drive, and then the car goes like this, inevitably. I mean, it's very much like a passenger holding the steering wheel from the side. Well, let me drive this car. Zen doesn't really allow you to do that, especially if you're stepping into this kind of monastic life. And we say, no, we want to see the true driver, and that driver needs to be holding the steering wheel. And that driver is the one who has to hold that sword. That driver is the one who's holding the bat. And with this understanding, I think it might actually help to understand many aspects of the life that happens in the sort of Zen culture. And in a sense, that is liberation, the kindness that we can do. I used to teach language, and used to teach language. I still do in a sense, yes. You know, people need excitement. Like, okay, you can watch this terrific movie. It's beautiful. It's going to inspire you to study more. You can watch, for your studying Japanese, maybe you can recommend Samurai or maybe some Doraemon, some anime. But fundamentally, these are good entertainers. A mind, emotions, intellect, looking for occasions for entertainment, sort of inspired, satisfied. Then again, it's a language is also a little bit similar, although it's a process of acquisition that happens. So it's not exactly the same, but it's fine to talk about this fancy book that shows you this fancy expressions, slangs. Oh, slangs! I love slangs, but the books that cover slangs. But but then when you're out there, food speaking, uh, so in a language theory, there's this kind of thing called a language device here, somewhere here. And then this language device processes this, and we become a person. The person has this capacity to understand, we say Buddha Dharma. We, I don't want to deny this, inviting moments that comes with beautiful feelings, loving care, intellectual sort of stimulation, this inspiration. I think these are wonderful things, but you can't let them be holding that steering wheel again, because you will encounter that challenge in one way or another. And so finding out who is it in you driving this car of life is a crucial factor that really determines the course of your practice and life in a sense. So, and then this is a constant struggle. But then also something I notice only because I have this privilege to encounter students. If I was just doing this alone, I don't think I would have really kind of thought about this or had to struggle this way. So I'm really thankful to all my students, and especially the ones who are struggling. I am really grateful, and that's good. That's good. I'm sorry, it sounds horrible, but that's all I have to say. That's good, and thank you.